if you look ahead, what do we have ahead? We have chapter 10, 11, and 12, and then we have the final, right? What? Then we're done. So guess what? We're gonna try to spend this week on chapter 10, the next week on chapter 11, the next week on chapter 12, and then we're gonna try to spend the next week before Thanksgiving on getting ready for the final. And then that way, you'll be able to take the final, the first two parts of the final on the last week of class before finals week. And then the last part of the, in fact, actually, if we get one class ahead of schedule, we could actually try to take the final on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday of the last week of class. Then you wouldn't even have to come for finals in this class. You still have it in your other classes, but would you like that or not?
Yes.
Okay, good. And then we might even be able to take a holiday. I'm not ever supposed to tell this there because it's not allowed, but possibly if we get done with all that stuff, chapter 12 before Thanksgiving and everything like that, and the review for the final, we might even be able to actually take an extra holiday on Thanksgiving week. But I can't promise that though. So, and I'm not supposed to ever promise that anyway. So, but we'll just see what happens though. So you ready to start chapter 10? By the way, let me spit out my gum because it probably distorts my voice. There we go. Perfect. Okay. By the way, if you ever take pictures and you look and your face looks strange in them, sometimes that's actually just because you have gum in your mouth. That's one thing I've noticed before. Some people are chewing gum in their pictures and then they always look strange. Okay, 1. Find the distance between the points. 3, 1, and 11, 7. 3, 1, and 11, 7. 3, 1, and 11, 7. What's the distance between those points? So the distance formula. So first, let me plot the points like this. 3, 1 is like right there. Boom. 11, 7 is like way over there. And up there, right? So let me teach you that you really actually know how to do this by the Pythagorean theorem, which is an old-fashioned theorem from about 2,000 years ago by Pythagoras. Pythagoras had a secret society with like 55 or so math secrets that he didn't want to tell anybody. He only told his inner circle about them, and including the Pythagorean theorem. And if you told anybody the math secrets that you weren't supposed to tell, they'd take you in a rowboat into the middle of the lake, throw you overboard, and then they'd row back to the shore. So thankfully, we don't have that much secrecy about math nowadays. But this distance is called A, this distance is called B, and this distance is called, what do you think it's called? C. And remember, the Pythagorean theorem says that if you have a right triangle, which means one side is perpendicular to the other side, like a right angle, then that means that the two short sides, A and B, if you square them and add them, you'll get the square of the long side. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. That's the Pythagorean theorem. And what's the distance between 3 to 11? How far is it from 3 to 11? So what is A? So from this point to 11, how far is it between those 2 points from 3 to 11? What is 11 minus 3? It's 8, correct. I think it is. Is it 8? Yeah, it is 8. So A equals 8. And B is the distance from the vertical, is the length of the vertical side. What distance is it from 1 to 7? From the top to, I'm just having fun making these arrows. How far is it from 1 to 7? 6. So B equals 6. And so therefore, A squared plus 6 squared equals C squared. Now, did you know mathematically you're actually doing lots of complex things in your brain? Because in order to calculate that, well, I'll wait until the end, but what is A squared though? 64. And 6 squared is 36. 36 plus 64 is 100. So 100 equals C squared. And then what is C? 10, correct. And you can't have a negative distance, so it has to be positive 10. Technically, it could be positive or negative 10 could be the solution, but we'll throw out the negative 10 and just keep the positive 10. Now, what we actually just did is that 10 actually can be done in one big, huge step, which is this. we calculated a squared by doing the 11 minus the 3. So we did the second x value minus the first x value and squared them. So x2 minus x1 squared represents the 8 and the 64. And then plus b squared, b is equal to the second y value minus the first y value squared. And then that would be b squared. So 10 actually is equal to the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. That's called the distance formula. I'm going to say DISTFORM period as the abbreviation. So the distance formula is equal to that. We're going to use the distance formula to calculate the distance between 3, 1, and 11, 7, and we just did it, and we got 10. So the answer to question 1 is 10. But let's use it in question 2. Let's do it in question 2, too. So question 2 says -4, -8, and 5, -7. We have to calculate the distance between them. So this time, instead of drawing a triangle and taking up all that space, we're just going to go to the formula. The formula says to do x2 minus x1 parentheses squared plus y2 minus y1 parentheses squared. All of it inside of a square root. So there's a distance formula. And what is a negative negative? A negative negative is actually a positive, right? And what's a negative minus a negative? That's actually an adding. That's a -12. What's -8 plus 4? It's -4. And then what is -4 times -4? Should I close the doors? Okay, so then -4 times -4 is positive 16. And what is -12 times -12? Positive 144. What's 16 plus 144? It sounds like it's 160, right? Now 160 is oh, you're right. So, okay, so I finally made a mistake. So remember last time I was trying to do something wrong? So I really did something wrong this time. I think I was distracted by the phone call, but that's just an excuse though. Okay, so we actually have to subtract x2, which is actually 5 minus x1. So let me redo this problem. My fault. So it's actually not, do not do what I do. Never learn from that bad example. There we go. Do not learn from that bad example. There we go. Perfect. There we go. Okay, great. So then it's actually x2, which is 5 actually, minus x1, which is -4. So do not do it like me. Do it like you're supposed to do it. And then y2, which is -7, minus y1, which is -8. So does that look better? Okay, let me make sure. I don't want to think too fast. By the way, that shows when you have a distraction that your brain can't think straight. So, oh, actually, I remember this morning I was driving on my school this morning, and I saw these like ambulances and fire trucks going to like an accident or something, and I remember thinking to myself, I want to watch them and stuff. So I started to watch them, and then I realized I was like drifting out of my lane, and I was like, well, actually, if I really care about that accident, the best thing I can do is just ignore that accident and pay attention to myself so that I don't get into an accident. So that's actually smart. So what's 5 minus -4? It's actually 5 plus 4. Yep. And what's negative 7 minus negative 8? It's actually negative 7 plus 8. And that would be 9. That would be 1. What's 9 squared? 81, and 1 squared is 1, and 81 plus 1 is 82. Can you break down 82 into anything that has a square root? No. So that's actually the final exact answer. So part A is equal to 82. Part B says to round it off to the nearest decimal places of how many decimals? It says 2 decimal places. So if I do that, you should end up with about 9.06 if you round it off. I don't even know why they want you to round it off, but I just want to make sure that you can, I guess. Okay, let's do, do you want to do another one of those, or do you think you're good with those? Do you think you are good at, let's go skip to the next one. So what, after finding distance between points, now you want to find the midpoint between points. What is the midpoint between points? By the way, was there like a really cool play last weekend? There was, wasn't there? Yeah, there was. Yeah. How many of you went and saw that play? You guys should have seen it, guys. It was so good. Okay, so midpoint between points. How do you find the midpoint between points? How do you find the midpoint between points? How do you find the midpoint between points? Well, I'll give you a hint. Let's do one, and then that'll be the hint. So let's say the point 1 is 8.6, and let's say point 2 is 4.2. Guess what? The midpoint between points has to have a point, an x point that's halfway between the two other x points. So can anybody tell me how to find the point that's halfway between the x value of 8 and 4? What x value is halfway between 8 and 4? What number is exactly right between 8 and 4? 6. Correct. Smart. What number is it? What? And the y value of the midpoint is the middle of right between the two y values of the point. So right between 6 and 2 is 4. And what formula did you use to calculate the middle? That's called the average. To find the middle between two numbers, you have to add the average of two numbers is equal to the first number plus the second number divided by 2, right? So for example, it's 8 plus 4 divided by 2 equals 12 divided by 2 equals 6. So does that make sense that you have to take the average? But when you write it all out, you actually did a lot of complicated work in your brains to find the midpoint. Because what you really did was you actually took the first x value and you took the second x value and then you averaged them by dividing by 2. Then you took the first y value and the second y value and then you averaged them by dividing by 2. Now you might have done it a different way in your mind because your mind can probably just visualize it. But theoretically, though, what you're really doing without knowing it was that formula. That formula is called the midpoint formula. So there's the midpoint formula. Let's try to do a really hard one with the midpoint formula, such as number 6. So let's do number 6. By the way, the one that I just did was number 4, like number 4, and now let's do one like number 6. So number 6. Number 6 specifically says -4, -8. Wow. And then 11, -4. Perfect. Well, this sounds like maybe like a secret code, like for maybe like football plays or something. By the way, congratulations to the football team for winning last weekend. Sweet. So how do I do the formula? So we're going to do x1 plus x2 divided by 2, then y1 plus y2 divided by 2, and then calculate the results. So who can tell me what -4 plus 11 is? What is -4 plus 11? That would be 7 over 2. What's -8 plus -4? Be -12 over 2. Does 7 over 2 break down in algebra or not? No. Does -12 divided by 2 break down? Yes. So there we go. So 7 halves -6, that's the solution. Perfect. Good job. Okay, now we're gonna learn about something even sweeter and cooler than that. Ready? We're gonna learn about the standard form of the equation of a circle. You ever heard of that before? So, circle, boom, circle. The center of the circle in this problem 8. Okay, let me write the problem down. The center of this circle is supposed to be, oh, wow, they actually said it. They said 6, 7. I'm not even kidding. Look, it literally says that on my page. And then R, the radius is 3. And you're supposed to write the equation. What does the equation of a circle look like? A circle is actually basically like this. It's all the points, X and Y, whose distance from the center point is equal to the radius. How can I change that sentence into a math equation? If I say all the points X and Y whose distance from center equals the radius, how do I define that as an equation? Well, the distance between a point XY and the center is called X minus 6, like X2 minus X1, plus Y2 minus Y1 squared equals the distance, which is whose distance from the center equals the radius, and the radius is 3. So that's the equation of the circle whose center is that, but that's not going to be counted right if you type that in, though. I need to simplify it. How do we get rid of the square root? How do you get rid of a square root in an equation? If it's by itself on one side, square both sides. So if I square both sides, then you'll get X minus 6 squared plus Y minus 7 squared equals 9. That's actually called the standard form of the equation of a circle. So the standard form of the equation of a circle is equal to standard form of circle equation is equal to X squared plus Y squared equals radius squared. And then in here, these 2 points, those 2 points are both the opposite, opposite, hold on, let me spell this again. Opposite. By the way, why was, I shouldn't say that. Opposite of the center point. Center points X and Y values. Center points X and Y. Okay, so standard form for a circle equation is X squared plus Y squared, and then inside the X and the Y, after the X and the Y, you have the opposites of the center points X and Y. So if the center points X and Y values are called H and K, that's what they call them in math, usually. Then this would be the opposite of H, negative H, and this would be the opposite of K. But I don't really like that definition very much because this makes it look like it's always negatives. But actually, if H is a negative, though, then this would actually be a positive instead of negative. And the same thing, if K is a negative, this would actually be a plus instead of a minus. So I think it's more clear if you just remember it's the opposites of whatever the center points are. So let's try that one for number 9. Ready? So that, by the way, the answer to number 8 is this equation right here. That's the final answer, actually, is that. So let's try number 9, and let's use the advanced special formula for it. So number 9 says to write the equation of a circle whose center is 4, negative 5, and radius equals 3. So it's going to be X squared plus Y squared equals radius squared. And what numbers go inside the X and Y after the X and after the Y? The opposites. So what's the opposite of 4? So there's a negative 4 that goes in with the X. What's the opposite of negative 5? Positive 5. So there's a positive 5 that goes with the Y. And then you have to square the 3. So what's 3 squared? 9. So you just get x minus 4 squared plus y plus 5 squared equals 9. That's the answer. Fantastic. Now, can you work your way backwards? Can you work your way backwards? Let's skip one. Let's go to number 11. Because, yeah, I know that on a scale of 1 to 10, you're an 11 out of 10. Because you're so amazing. X plus 2 squared plus y minus 2 squared equals 9. I forgot something. What did I forget? The squares. So there we go. So x plus 2 squared plus y minus 2 squared equals 9. Now we're working backwards. So we're seeing the final answer and we're not seeing the original problem. How do you work backwards from the final answer, though? What do you have to do to work backwards? Well, notice that if the final equation says 9, then how do you work backwards? What's the opposite of squaring something? Square rooting something, right? So in order to find the radius from the equation, the radius is the square root of the 9, which is equal to 3. So the radius equals 3. And how do you work backwards from the equation and find the center of the circle? What is the center of the circle? It's the opposites of the numbers with the x and with the y. So what's the opposite of the number after the x in the squares? It would be -2. And what's the opposite of the number with the y in the parentheses? +2. So that's the answer. The radius equals 3 and the center equals -2, 2. And on this one, they also want you to prove that you really knew what you were doing by graphing the circle. How do you graph the circle? So you go to the graph on your computer, but we don't have a computer right now on my paper. So just draw a vertical line on your paper, draw a horizontal line on the paper, or on the graph, you just click on the graphing tool. The next thing you do on paper is you plot the center point, and the next thing you do on the computer will be to click on the circle tool and then plot the center point. So either way, the first thing you do is plot the center point. So let me change my color to a different color so it's easier to see. So we're going to go left 2 and up 2, because that point right there represents -2, 2. Then after you plot the center point, then what do you do next? You go out. How far do you go out from the center point? 3. Now you have the freedom to go out either up, or straight down, or straight right, or straight left. I'm going to go straight right, because that way I can just see how far right it goes. So hop once, hop twice, hop 3 times. Did you know that actually 3 times actually is called thrice? Once, twice, thrice. Have you ever heard the word thrice? Yes. But there's no word for 4, I don't think. Like once is a word, twice is a word, thrice is a word. But I don't think that thrice is a word though. Because if it was 4 times it'd be fries. But they do have fries though. They have fries, but they don't have fries though. Okay, so we go 3 times over, and then what point is that point after going 3 times to the right? What would the coordinates of the new point be? It'd have an x value of 1, and the y value would still be 2, right? And then once you get to any point that's 3 units away from the first point, then you draw a circle and go 3 units up, 3 units. Now, technically, you probably should draw 4 points and do 3 units up, 3 units left, 3 units down. But I'm going to just skip that part because I think on the computer you don't have to. You just have to pick one direction, and then you go in that direction. And then the other directions are automatic. So there's the worst circle in the world. Look how bad of a drawer I am. Wow, I feel like I should try again. Isn't that the lumpiest, worst looking circle ever? I'm gonna try one more time. Who predicts I can do a better one if I try again? Probably can't actually, but. Wow, don't ask me to draw. Yeah, that's a little bit better. Somewhat better. Okay, so there's the circle. Any questions about that? Now, actually, I'm going to go backwards to number 10 next because I'm not going to do the whole problem though, but I just want to explain a little confusing thing about number 10. Because number 10 is an example of when the homework is trying to make it easy for you, but sometimes people actually get tripped up on number 10 more than they do on number 11. So watch closely. Number 10 just simply says this equation right here. Number 10 says x squared plus y squared equals 25. So finding the radius is still easy. So find the radius. The radius is the square root of the number on the right side, which is 5. Now find the center. Uh-oh. Our brain doesn't compute x squared plus y squared as the same format as the other one, though. So what is the center of the circle at the top? So I know the center of the circle at the bottom is -2, +2. What's the center of the circle on the top when it does not look in the same form? What is the center? 0, 0, right. And does everybody know why it's 0, 0? Because isn't there like a 1 in front of those? There's like a 1 in front. So why wouldn't the center be 1, 1? Or -1, 1? Or -1? Why is it 0, 0 instead of 1, 1? It's because you don't look at the number in front of it. Like, yes, there's a 1 in front of this and in front of this. But you don't look at the numbers in front. You look at the numbers inside the parentheses. But wait a second, though, there are no parentheses in this top problem, right? There's no parentheses. So whenever there's no parentheses, that means the numbers are 0. Why is that? Because look, if you put parentheses there on the x, you just have x. X is the same as saying x minus 0. A y is the same as saying y minus 0. So whenever you don't have anything except for x squared, that's actually like saying x minus 0 squared. And the opposite of -0 is +0. So that's why if you just have an x squared and a y squared, that's actually 0, 0. So I'm going to test you on a real quick question. What if you have a circle that's x squared plus y minus 2 squared equals 16? So what's the radius of this? 4. And what's the center of it? 0. Okay, I thought I could trick you, but I couldn't because you're smart. So when there's just x squared, that means the center x is 0. And when there's a y minus 2 squared, that means the center is the opposite of -2, so it's +2. So you figured that out. Brilliant. You should be math majors. Have you ever thought about being a math major? Okay. Well, did you know the one thing I remember actually a lot was one time when I was first a teacher, maybe my first or second year, I liked substituting because I liked teaching so much. Whenever anybody else had it, I wanted to like go on vacation, I'd be like, "Can I teach your class for you?" And so one morning I was teaching this beginning algebra class, or maybe in a basic mathematics class, but there was only like 3 students in it because like everybody else had failed or something. But I remember teaching the class. One of the students in that class actually just liked the math so much that they were learning that they went into intermediate algebra and then college algebra and then trigonometry and then pre-calculus and then calculus 1 and then calculus 2. And they like went all the way into calculus and they might have even become a math major. I'm not sure about the math major part. But I was impressed though because they went so far through math all the way from the bottom all the way to the top. So that's crazy. But it was inspiring though. Let's see. Now, are you ready to really do the most impossible problem of your life? Do you remember the day when when the student up here said to go ahead and show you how the quadratic formula really works? Do you remember that? And I showed you like how the quadratic formula actually works. So there's actually something that you actually do need to learn in college algebra. It separates the college algebra from the intermediate algebra. It's called completing the square. Completing the square. Basically, completing the square is basically can be reduced into an easy equation. Other teachers don't explain this until the end, but I'm going to explain it at the beginning. So basically, x squared plus bx. If you have x squared and another x, that's tricky to work with because they're not like terms. One of them's squared, one of them's not squared. There's no way to get them together unless you know something special, which I'm going to tell you. X squared plus bx is actually equal to x plus half. Do you know what the word half means? Like, what's half and half? Half cream and half milk, right? So half of b squared minus half of b squared. That's called this completing the square formula. Now, Other teachers maybe teach it in a little bit harder of a way, but I'm just going to keep it to the bare bones and it'll still work. So let's take this equation right here in let's take the equation in number 13. By the way, did you know why Halloween is so scary? Because it's 30, the 31st is actually 13 spelled backwards. Did you ever think about that? So x squared plus y squared plus 4x minus 2y minus 20 equals 0. So look at that problem. We're supposed to find the center and radius of that problem down at the bottom. And guess what? The center of this circle is not 0, 0. Why is the center of this circle not 0, 0? Because they're actually, x squared is not really x squared by itself. There's actually is another x. So this x and this x squared need to be combined together into 1x in parentheses, and then you can find the center. But you can't do that with normal algebra because those two terms are not like terms. So you can't add them into one term. So you're stuck. So here's where you have to use that formula that I just taught you. First, put the x squared and the 4x together, like that. Now you don't really have to do this step, but this step just helps you visualize it better. And then put the y's together, put the y squared and the negative 2y together. And then the negative 20 and the equal 0, just put those at the end. Now, we have something that's in the form of x squared plus bx right here. Look at that. X squared plus something beside x. What you do is you change the x squared into a single parentheses and a single x that has a square outside the parentheses. Now, who's smart? Who can tell me who'd be willing to volunteer to divide 4 by 2? What's 4 divided by 2? 2. So remember the formula says you have to divide the number by 2. Let me change colors so you can see where I am. Divide the number by 2 that was beside the x. So that's what we're doing. 4 divided by 2 is 2, right? And then you have to subtract that. So the same thing over here, we have to do minus 4 divided by 2 squared. But 4 divided by 2 is just 2, so it's going to be minus 2 squared. So it's actually easier in real life than it is in the formula. In fact, most formulas look harder than they are actually in real life. So we completed the square for the first term. Now let's complete the square for the second term. So take the y squared minus 2y and put only one y inside the parentheses and then put a square outside the parentheses. Now you have to, who's willing to tell me what negative 2 divided by 2 is? What is negative 2 divided by 2? Negative 1. And now we have to subtract negative 1 squared on the outside. So whatever half of the number is that's beside the letter, you put that inside the parentheses. So whatever number is beside the letter, right there, you put half as much of it inside the parentheses. So since half of negative 2 is negative 1, you're going to put negative 1 in the parentheses. And then you also have to subtract half of that number squared. Well, half the number is negative 1, so we're going to subtract negative 1 squared. So we completed the square for both of those terms. Now we're going to keep the negative 20 and the equal 0 the same way. Which negative 20 equals 0. Now we're going to simplify this. So we're going to group the two terms with squares together. So we're going to put the x plus 2 squared, and then right after that, we're going to put the y minus 1 squared. And then we're going to take the terms that are negative, put them on the right side to make them positive. So we're going to put a positive 2 squared and a positive negative 1 squared and a positive 20 all on the right. And then we're going to simplify the right. So what is 2 squared? 4. What is negative 1 squared? Positive 1. And what is 20? It's just 20. Then what is 4 plus 1? By the way, did you know that some degrees of friends are 4 plus 1 degrees? That if you get into a special, get into a special program somehow, you can actually graduate with your regular bachelor's degree in 4 years, and then you can finish your master's degree in only 1 more year. If you really want to be like extra killer on your resume. So 4 plus 1 plus 20 is 25. And then the only thing left on the left is a 2 perfect squares. Boom. So something that's inside of a parentheses with a square on the outside is called a perfect square. Now, that was a ton of work. Wow, what a lot of work. I forgot what the problem was about. Let me read the instructions. The instructions said to find the center and the radius. Okay, well now that I'm done with completing the square, all the completing the squares, now what's the center and what's the radius? So who can tell me the center of it? I'm positive 1. And who can tell me the radius of it? What's the square root of 25? 5, correct. So you now know the center and you know the radius. So completing the square enables you to find the center and the radius for a problem that is all scatterbrained and all like randomly spread out instead of being grouped into parentheses. So when you have a problem that's all separated out like a quadratic equation, you can turn it into a standard equation by completing the square. Let's do that one more time so that you're really good at it. You ready? Let's do 14. 14. By the way, are any of you sophomores right now? If you're a sophomore, then you're in 14th grade. Did you ever think about that? That's impressive. So 14th grade. Wow. Crazy. That'd be like if you had that'd be like having 14 kids almost. Wow. 14th grade. Think of all that work of work that you've done on school. So problem 14 is x squared minus 8x plus y squared minus 9. Oh no. Equals 0. Okay. Wow, this might have fractions in it, but let's find out. So first of all, we're going to group the terms that have x's together. Boom and boom. And then we're going to group the terms that have y's in them together, like that. And then we're going to put the other ones over at the end. And does anybody see anything that has both the letter squared and the letter not squared? Yes. So we're going to complete the square on that term. How do you change x squared and then another number beside x? How do you change that into a perfect square? What do? You just take one x, put it inside the perfect square. Then what do you do next? What number do you put after the x inside the square? Half as much as what? As -8. So what's half of -8? -4. And then you have to subtract half of -8 squared on the outside. So there's really two perfect squares, basically. So it's x minus 4 squared, and then minus -4 squared. And then wait a second though, does y squared have any y that does not have a square? No, so y squared already is a perfect square. So we'll just put parentheses around the y just to indicate that it's already perfectly squared. There's no other y. So that's good. So that one's good to go. Like hot to go or whatever. HOTTOGO. Then we're going to group the two perfect squares together. So the x minus 4 squared plus the y squared go together now. And then all the negatives, well, actually anything else, even if it's negative or not, goes to the opposite side. So the negative -4 squared becomes a positive -4 squared. The -9 becomes a positive 9. And they both go to the right side. Then what is -4 to the squared? 16. And what is 16 plus 9? It is 25. So we x minus 4 squared plus y squared equals 25. And now what's the radius? Who's willing to tell me the radius? By the way, what bone goes together with the radius? I suddenly remembered the ulna, but I don't even know if that's right. Probably it's wrong, but never mind. So r equals 5, the radius is 5, and the center is, what's the center? 4 and 0. Yes, because the 4 is the opposite of -4, and there's 0 number added or subtracted to the y, so the opposite of 0 is 0. So that's the solution to number 14. Okay, perfect. Okay, let's do one more thing today. How many of you like eggs? Like for breakfast? You don't like eggs? That's our rule. Actually, let me ask you a random question. What was the price of eggs like last year? Does anybody remember? Did anybody have to buy eggs? Expensive, like $5 or $7 for like a dozen eggs. And I was feeling like really happy because last weekend I went to the store and got eggs and I only paid $1.49 for a dozen, like on sale at Dillon's. So I'm thankful that eggs have gotten back down to like a more normal level. But anyway, the reason I'm asking about eggs is what shape is the shape of an egg? The shape, wow, that's actually a pretty good egg. By the way, is there a store called the good egg or the 80 egg? But anyway, though, the equation of an egg is called an ellipse. Ellipse. And the equation of an ellipse is like this. X squared over a squared plus y squared over b squared equals 1. And it's sort of like a circle. So look inside the parentheses and tell me what the center of this says. Sort of like a circle. Pretend that's a circle. What numbers are inside the x squared and the y squared with them? 0, right? So the center of this ellipse is actually 0, 0. But the thing is, though, an ellipse is like a circle, but except for one difference, though. If you look at it, by the way, my ellipse is crooked, but if you look at the radius of an ellipse in the horizontal direction, that's one radius, like horizontal. That's the horizontal radius. Like I'm going to call it radius horizontal or whatever. Horizontal. But then if you look at the other side of the egg, like the narrow side, that radius, like the vertical radius, is different. So the vertical radius is different. So the square root of the number under the x, because x represents horizontal. So the horizontal radius is the square root of the number under the x squared. What's the square root of 25? 5. The vertical radius, I'm just going to say VR for short, like virtual reality. The vertical radius is the square root of the number under the y squared. What's the square root of 9? 3. So that means that this ellipse is having a center of 0, 0. There it is. And then it has a horizontal radius of 5, which means that horizontally it goes 5 to the right and 5 to the left. And then it has a vertical radius of 3, which means it goes up to 3 and down to negative 3. And if you draw a circle that's through those 4 points, it won't be a circle. It'll actually be an egg shape. It'll be an ellipse. And by the way, the orbits of planets are actually elliptical orbits. So that's like a planet in the solar system orbiting around the sun. So that's how to do an ellipse. We'll talk more about ellipses next time, but that's a great stopping place for today. So keep up your great work. Hopefully you have a delicious lunch. And you could even go to the easy egg if you want to, if it made you hungry. By the way, before I forget, let me make sure I get the